Her true story. From Tennessee, my son and daughter-in-law left me at the airport with no money. They had no idea I was headed to meet my lawyer. You know what, Mom? We only bought you a one-way ticket. The return trip? You'll figure it out. That was what my daughter-in-law said as she rolled her designer luggage into the first-class lane, not even glancing back at me. She smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they think they are doing you a favor by telling you a hard truth. You've got a phone. Call someone to come get you. Or sell it. That'll cover a Greyhound, right? And just like that, they were gone. Gone through the security checkpoint, gone into the tunnel of airport gates and vacation selfies, gone with every ounce of dignity I still had left in their eyes. I stood there, alone, in the middle of Nashville International Airport, holding my purse tight against my chest. No suitcase, no boarding pass, no ticket, just a thin sweater and a printed itinerary I now realized was for show. They had never meant for me to come back with them. I had never been meant to be part of this trip at all. The noise of the airport swelled around me, calls for boarding, rolling suitcases clacking over tile, laughter in a language I no longer understood. I felt like a statue in a place that never paused. People glanced at me, then looked away quickly. One woman gave me a polite smile that melted into pity the moment her eyes dropped to the empty space where my luggage should have been. I wanted to disappear. And for a moment, I did. Just hours earlier, I had woken up believing I was part of something. A family trip, they had called it. A healing getaway after the funeral. My husband, God rest him, had passed just 2 months ago, 42 years married. We buried him on a rainy Monday. They said I should get out of the house, get some air, and stop crying all the time. They said this trip would be good for me. So I went. I sold the last set of pearls he gave me, used the money to help with the flights. It's a group effort, they told me, smiling. Everyone's pitching in. But I never saw a receipt. I never saw the return booking. And I never questioned it. Because I was taught to trust family, even when they stopped treating you like one. At check-in, I noticed Tanya's mother had a priority tag on her bag. She had a first-class ticket. So did Tanya and my son Mark. I assumed we'd all be sitting apart for boarding convenience. Tanya said they would come back and check on me after takeoff. But that was before they scanned my ticket and told me it had already been voided. Sorry, ma'am, it shows here that there's no return trip under your name, the attendant said, eyebrows furrowed with that mixture of politeness and dread people use when they do not want to deal with tears. I had smiled at her. There must be some mistake. But when I turned around, they were already walking away. I followed them to the security line, still holding my little folder of travel documents. And that was when Tanya turned, sighed, and said the words that I now believe had been rehearsed. You know what, Mom? We only bought you a one-way ticket, the return trip. You'll figure it out. She said it like she was telling me what the weather would be tomorrow. And when she added the part about the phone, sell it if you need bus money, Mark didn't correct her. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just adjusted his sunglasses and kept walking. They left me there, like an old receipt. Used, discarded, unneeded. I stood there long after they disappeared through security, too stunned to move, too proud to sit. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just breathed one shallow breath at a time. The last time I felt that kind of abandonment, I was 9 years old, waiting on a father who never came back from a short trip to the next town. And here I was again, full circle. Only this time, I had raised the person who left me. People kept moving around me. The world didn't stop because I did. A man with a baby stroller passed by. A woman herding teenagers in matching dance uniforms shouted over the din. Somewhere, a flight to Orlando was beginning final boarding. The sun was hitting the glass walls just right, and it hurt my eyes. I looked down at my phone, not because I expected a message from Mark. He wouldn't dare. But to check that it was still in my hand. It was the only thing I had left that said I existed, that I mattered. I thought about calling someone. But who? My sister passed years ago. My friends had their own grown children, their own pains. I wasn't about to call anyone and admit that I had been left behind at an airport by my own family. No, I would not hand them my humiliation. Instead, I took a deep breath, walked over to the nearest bench, and sat down with my back straight and my chin high. I might not have had a ticket home, but I had something else. Tucked in my bra, right next to my heart, was a small envelope. Inside was the business card of a lawyer, my husband's old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years but who had always said, "If you ever need anything, Blake, you come find me." And now I would, because I might have been left with nothing. But that didn't mean I had nothing left to do. Grief does not knock when it arrives. It doesn't ask to come in. It crashes through the front door and sits in your favorite chair like it's always belonged there. That was what it felt like when Jake passed. Not sudden, but complete. One moment he was there, humming off-key in the kitchen, asking where I'd hidden the cinnamon, and the next he was slumped in the hallway, the mug of coffee still warm in his hand. A stroke, they said, massive, irreversible, final. We had been married for 42 years. 42 years of routines and rituals, of fights that ended with quiet forgiveness, of shared looks across rooms when no words were needed, of raising a son and losing a pregnancy and trying again, of watching life unfold in the shape of each other's laugh lines. He died on a Tuesday. It rained that morning. Not the kind of rain that makes you rush inside, but the kind that soaks into the bones without you realizing it. I remember standing at the kitchen sink hours after they took him, watching droplets slide down the window like they were trying to find their way home. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just listened to the sound of everything being quieter than it had ever been. The days that followed were a blur of casseroles and condolences. People I hadn't seen in years brought flowers and stories, most of which I was too numb to absorb. The funeral was short. Jake never liked being the center of attention. He used to say, "If anyone cries at my funeral, make sure they bring a mop." I tried not to cry, but I brought tissues anyway. After the service, I went home alone to the house we built together. The bed felt too big. The rooms echoed differently. His slippers were still under the nightstand. His toothbrush sat beside mine like nothing had changed, as if grief wasn't a thief but just a shadow, polite enough to knock before stealing everything that mattered. The weeks crawled by. Some days I didn't leave the house. I'd sit in the chair he loved most and try to remember the exact way he laughed when something was really funny, that belly-deep chuckle that made his shoulders bounce. I tried to remember how he looked at me when I came into a room. I tried to remember who I was before I became the widow. And then one morning, Mark came by. He hugged me, light and distracted, and said, "Mom, I was talking to Tanya and we think it'd be good for you to get away for a bit." "Away?" I repeated. "Yeah, just a short trip," he said, "to clear your head. We're thinking of taking the kids down to Florida for spring break. You should come, it could be nice." Tanya nodded beside him, all practiced sympathy. "Just to breathe a little, change of scenery. Don't you think Jake would want that for you?" It felt like someone opened a window. I hadn't been out of Tennessee in over 5 years. The thought of sand between my toes, of sun on my shoulders, of not waking up to silence, it stirred something I thought was long gone. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Of course," Tanya smiled. "Your family. Family." I clung to that word like a life raft. Later that week I opened my jewelry box, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. Nestled in the corner was the gold wedding band Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. It wasn't expensive, but it was real gold. He'd saved for months and surprised me on a Tuesday morning, sliding it onto my finger with a whisper. 10 more years, then 10 more after that. I wore it every day until the day he died. Now I held it in my hand, felt its weight, its warmth, and then I let it go. I walked to the small pawn shop down the street and sold it. The man behind the counter looked surprised. "You sure, ma'am?" "I'm sure," I said, even as my throat tightened. I used the money to pitch in for the trip. When Tanya had mentioned everyone contributing, I assumed that included me, so I offered without being asked. It felt good to still be needed, to be included, to be more than just a photo in a frame. That night I cried alone in my room, not just for Jake, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. I packed my bag carefully. I placed a small framed photo of Jake in the pocket of my carry-on. I chose my softest sweater, the one he always said made me look classy as hell. I folded a beach towel I hadn't used in years and tucked a paperback I'd been meaning to read for months into the front pocket. And before I zipped it all shut, I placed a folded tissue in the top flap, just in case. I didn't know that by the time I reached the airport, all of it, the bag, the towel, the hope, would be gone. That the woman I had been, while packing, would not be the same woman left standing alone at gate B22, that I had not been invited out of love or grief or even pity. I had been included for convenience, for what I could give, not who I was. I see that now. But back then, in those days between the funeral and the flight, I believed in the story they told me, that I was still part of the family, that I was still wanted. I was wrong. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when you realize you are not part of the plan. Not forgotten, because forgetting implies accident. No, this is different. This is the realization that someone looked at you, considered you, and still decided you were disposable. It happened at the airline counter. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," the agent said politely, tapping at her keyboard. "There's no return flight booked under your name." I blinked. "I'm with my son's family, Monroe. The reservation should be under Monroe." She checked again, this time with a deeper frown. "I do see a Monroe group, but the return tickets are only for 6 passengers. You're not listed." She looked up at me with that rehearsed empathy they must practice in training, the kind that says, "I'm so sorry your life just cracked open, but I still have a line behind you." I felt my breath catch in my throat. There has to be a mistake. "We can check if there's a return flight available," she offered. "But it would need to be purchased separately." I didn't respond. I turned slowly, scanning the bustling terminal, and spotted Mark and Tanya near a coffee stand, laughing about something on her phone. I walked over, still holding my printed itinerary, the edges now damp from the sweat on my palms. "Mark," I said gently, "the agent says I don't have a return ticket. Can you check yours?" He glanced up, eyes darting, a flicker of discomfort flashing across his face before it was replaced by a half-hearted smile. "Oh, right, yeah," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "We figured you might want to stay a little longer. You know, enjoy some peace and quiet." My heart paused. "What?" Tanya chimed in, no pretense. "We only bought you a one-way, Blake. Flights are expensive. And let's be honest, you've got plenty of time. You're retired, right?" I thought this was a round trip," I said, voice thin, almost childlike. Tanya shrugged, sipping her coffee. "You're an adult, you can figure it out. You've got your phone, there's Wi-Fi, or call someone to help. This is a vacation, not a charity drive." I looked at my son. "Mark?" He didn't meet my eyes. "It just made more sense this way, Mom. We thought it'd be good for you to stay a few extra days, maybe even see some friends. I didn't pack for more days." "Well," Tanya said, now checking her nails, "there are stores." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, clutching that worthless itinerary like a shield. I realized then that I didn't have my suitcase. They had checked their bags together at the curbside drop-off. Tanya had waved off my small carry-on and told me, "Let us handle it, Blake. Just relax." It was probably still in the trunk. They hadn't just left me without a return flight. They had taken my luggage, too. "Where's my bag?" I finally asked. Mark looked at Tanya. She looked back at him. Then she said, "We're checking it with ours, but we can get it back to you later if you stay longer." I stood there, stunned. "So I don't have a flight. I don't have my things, and you didn't think I'd need to know that before we got to the airport." "You're overreacting," Tanya said flatly. "You said you wanted to be included. Well, this is how we do things, flexibly." Mark added, "We didn't mean anything by it. You're just so emotional since Dad passed, and we thought this would be easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. Neither of them answered. Instead, Tanya reached down, zipped up her designer bag, and said, "We've got to head to security. Our boarding group's almost up." And that was that. They walked away. No hug, no apology, no recognition that I had been reduced to an afterthought with a boarding pass. I stood there as they moved toward the TSA line, Tanya's heels clicking confidently, Mark carrying nothing but his carry-on and a face void of shame. For a moment, I felt like I was sinking, like the floor under me had given way, and I was slowly being pulled into the kind of loneliness no one ever warns you about, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from being discarded by the very people who should love you most. A woman pushing a stroller bumped gently into me and apologized. I nodded but couldn't speak. My hands shook as I stepped away from the flow of travelers and sat on a bench against the wall. I didn't cry. I was too far past tears. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, not to call them, not to call anyone in the family. I pulled up my notes app and typed a single line. "This will be the last time I trust them." Then I scrolled to the contact I had saved under the name J.R. Lawyer. Jake had introduced us back when he was still working. J.R. had handled our mortgage paperwork, our wills. He had always said, "If you ever need anything, Blake, I'll be there." I clicked the number and pressed call. When he answered, I didn't say hello. I didn't explain. I said, "I need to update my will," and just like that, my role changed. I was no longer the forgotten mother on a one-way ticket. I was a woman preparing to reclaim her voice. I looked at the boarding monitor. Their flight was on time. So was mine. It just wasn't headed where they thought. I did not follow them to the gate. I sat on that bench in the airport terminal until their flight disappeared from the departure board, until the loudspeaker announced final boarding and no more messages came through from Mark. Not that I expected one. He and Tanya had likely settled into their extra legroom seats, sipping complimentary orange juice, already posting filtered photos with captions about family time and recharging. But I wasn't part of that caption. Not anymore. I reached into the side pocket of my purse, past the folded tissues, the peppermints, and the hand cream. My fingers found the envelope before I even looked, the one I'd kept tucked away for 6 years. It was something Jake and I called our break glass in case of fire fund. We started it after his heart scare. Just a few $100s at first. Then we added to it, quietly, as we got older. A 50 here, a 20 there. Sometimes 100 slipped in after a tax return. It was never meant for groceries or birthday gifts. It was meant for the day one of us had no one else to rely on and needed to move fast. I unfolded the envelope. $960, 0 cents in cash, still crisp from the bank. It was not much, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was enough. I flagged down a cab at the curb outside the airport, gave the driver an address I hadn't spoken aloud in years, 287 Jefferson Street, Monroe and Wade Law Office. He nodded and pulled into traffic. The cab smelled faintly of pine and something fried. I stared out the window as the familiar streets passed. Strip malls, gas stations, the aging heart of Tennessee where I'd spent most of my adult life. The last time I was at that law office, Jake had just retired. We had gone in to sign our first will. Back then, it was simple, everything to each other, and then to Mark. We had been so sure of our legacy, so sure of our son. Now I wasn't sure of anything, except that the name on that paper no longer deserved what it promised. JR was still there, older now, a little slower to stand, but his handshake still firm. "Blake," he said, eyes widening with surprise. "I haven't seen you in years. I was sorry to hear about Jake." "Thank you," I said, sitting carefully. "I'm here because I need to change my will." He raised an eyebrow. "All right. Anything specific?" I nodded. "I want to remove my son and daughter-in-law from every part of it." He paused. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He didn't ask why. JR had known Jake well enough to know I didn't do anything lightly. He just opened a folder, clicked his pen, and waited. "I'd like to add a new beneficiary," I continued. "An organization, one that supports elderly people who've been mistreated by their families." He looked up. "That's very specific." "I've become very specific." He nodded again. "We can absolutely do that. I'll need some paperwork from the organization." "I already have it." I slid a printed pamphlet from my bag, one I had picked up months ago at the community center, never thinking I'd use it for myself. As he copied the contact details, I leaned forward. "And while we're at it, I want to make sure that what happened to me, being left behind, taken advantage of, is something I can legally respond to, not just emotionally." "You mean financial exploitation?" he asked. "Yes, elder abuse," I said clearly. "Is there anything in the law that protects people like me?" "There is," he said, more serious now, "especially if the person being taken advantage of is a dependent or vulnerable adult. Did they access your funds directly?" "No, I gave it freely," I said, voice steady, "but under false pretenses. They led me to believe I was part of something I wasn't." He nodded slowly. "We can explore that. At the very least, I can help ensure they never touch another cent of what's yours." "Good," I said, "because I want this change notarized, effective immediately, and I want it sent to a third-party executor. I don't want anyone in my family touching my affairs ever again." "You got it," he started typing. For the next hour, we went line by line through the old will, name by name, number by number. Every assumption Jake and I had built now dismantled. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. By the time I left, I had a new folder in hand, a new plan, a new understanding of who I could count on. I walked out into the sunlight and didn't feel weak. I felt clean. I flagged another cab and gave them the name of a modest downtown motel. Not where I would stay forever, just for the night. Enough time to rest. Enough time to think. Enough time to remind myself that a woman with no return ticket is not a woman who's lost. She's a woman who has finally chosen her own direction. By the time morning light poured through the thin curtains of my motel window, the paperwork was done. It was official. My son and daughter-in-law were no longer part of my will. Their names, once written in confident ink on the lines labeled primary beneficiaries, were now erased. Replaced not with anger, not with vengeance, but with something far more powerful: intention. I didn't do it in a fit of rage. I did it slowly, deliberately, carefully, because some choices aren't made in a storm. They're made in stillness, after you've finally stopped pretending the rain will pass. The night before, after leaving JR's office, I sat on the motel bed with the documents spread out before me. Pages and pages of numbers, clauses, signatures. My life reduced to columns and categories. But also, for the first time in years, my life under my control again. It wasn't a large estate, nothing worthy of headlines, but it was enough. The house Jake and I paid off after 30 years. The farmland my father left me that we'd leased quietly for cattle grazing. A handful of investment accounts we had tended like a backyard garden, and the savings I had kept separate, money he insisted I maintain just in case. Well, the case had come, and now it would serve a purpose. I left it all to an organization called Elder Haven, a nonprofit focused on supporting older adults abandoned or financially exploited by their families. Housing assistance, legal protection, community programs. They helped women like me, and I knew I wasn't alone. I included a personal letter in the bequest, addressed to no one in particular, but written to every woman who might one day sit where I sat. Left behind, dismissed, treated like a burden instead of a blessing. If you are reading this, I wrote, you are not invisible, you are not crazy, and you are not done yet. That morning, before checking out of the motel, I called JR one last time. I want a digital copy, I said, scanned and password protected, sent only to the email I'll give you now. Do not share it with anyone else, not even if they come asking. He didn't question me, understood. Also, I added, I want the original stored at your office, locked, fireproof, with only you and the executor you named having access. You got it, Blake. And if anyone from my family contacts you, he didn't even pause. I'll remind them they were removed by your own hand. I exhaled. It was done. The chain had been cut. Not in fury, but in quiet freedom. It's a strange thing erasing someone you brought into the world from the future you once dreamed for them. But the truth is, they were never meant to inherit what they tried to buy with disrespect. Inheritance isn't just about money. It's about trust. And trust, once broken like mine had been, cannot be rebuilt with phone calls or flowers. It must be earned, and they had not even tried. Later that afternoon, I mailed copies of my documents, not to my family, but to a safety deposit box I opened in my own name. I listed myself as the sole key holder. I changed the passwords to my accounts. I updated every emergency contact form that still listed Mark, and when the bank teller asked, would you like to add a family member for access? I smiled. No, I said. Just me. Just me. Those two words had once sounded lonely, but now they sounded like survival, like strength, like starting over, not as someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's background presence, but as a woman reclaiming the story she still had the right to write. As I walked back to the motel to grab my bag, I passed a small park where children were climbing on jungle gyms, shrieking with joy. I sat on a bench for a moment, let the sun hit my face, and remembered something Jake used to say, everything you plant won't grow, but what does, that's yours. That's your legacy. I had planted enough. Now it was time to grow something new. I went back one final time, not to make a scene, not to deliver speeches, not even to say goodbye, just to take what was mine. I scheduled the moving truck for a Tuesday morning, midweek when I knew Mark and Tanya would both be at work. I did not want to see their faces. I didn't want another performance of concern, another round of shallow apologies delivered too late. I wanted peace. I wanted silence. The house looked smaller when I returned, or maybe I had just outgrown it. The shutters needed repainting. The front steps sagged. The wind chimes Jake had hung still clinked softly against the breeze, but they didn't make me smile like they used to. Nothing did in that house anymore. I let myself in with the spare key, still hidden in the planter, exactly where we'd left it for emergencies. And this, I thought, qualified. The movers were fast and kind. I'd hired them myself, from a town 2 counties over. I wanted no gossip, no small-town whispers. I'll be taking just a few things, I told them. A chair, Jake's favorite, the one that molded to his back after decades of reading in it, a box of books, our wedding album, his navy cap, my mother's quilt, nothing else. Not the furniture we bought together, not the dishes that once held Sunday roast, not the mattress we replaced after 30 years because he said I deserved better, just the pieces that still felt like truth. I walked through the rooms slowly, the kitchen where I had baked every birthday cake, the living room where we had danced on our anniversary, just the 2 of us, barefoot and tipsy, the hallway where Jake had fallen that day, coffee still steaming in his hand. I didn't cry. I had cried enough. I left the keys in a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter, along with a short note. Don't call, don't ask. I am exactly where I want to be. And then I left. The ride to the new place took under 2 hours, but it felt like crossing into another life. The sign out front read Willow Grove, Independent Living for Seniors with Dignity. I had toured it once before, quietly, with Jake. He wanted to make sure we had options, though I told him I'd never leave our home. Maybe one day, he said, grinning, if they have good pudding. Willow Grove had more than pudding. It had sunlight that poured through wide windows, hallways that smelled like lemon and not antiseptic, soft jazz playing in the common room, and people who looked up when you walked in, not through you, but at you. Welcome, Mrs. Monroe, the woman at the desk said, smiling. We've been expecting you. It was the first time in months I'd heard someone say my name like it mattered. I was shown to a corner unit with a view of the courtyard. My boxes were already there. My chair had been placed near the window. On the table was a welcome basket with jam, crackers, and a note handwritten by the director. Thank you for helping us make this place possible. Now it's yours, too. Because what they didn't know, what Mark and Tanya would never know, was that Willow Grove had been funded, in part, by the very donation I made through Elder Haven. My estate was not just a transfer of assets. It was a quiet revolution. I had built myself a place in the world where I would never again be forgotten, where I was not a burden, not a relic, just Blake. In the days that followed, I settled in. I joined the afternoon book circle. I met a retired teacher named Helen who made me laugh so hard I spilled coffee down my blouse. I started attending a watercolor class on Thursdays. I even signed up to lead a workshop on letter writing, something I'd done with Jake every Sunday for years. The best part? At 5:00 p.m., someone always came knocking to say, dinner's ready. Not because they wanted anything, just because they wanted me there. There was a seat with my name on it, and for the first time in a long time, I sat down without hesitation. I wasn't in the way. I wasn't tolerated. I was welcomed. The house I left behind was no longer my home. Because home isn't where you store things. It's where you are wanted. And I was finally home. It took 6 months. 6 months of silence. 6 months of peace. 6 months of morning coffee in the sunroom at Willow Grove, of learning how to sketch birds in watercolor, of hearing my own name spoken with kindness and never followed by a sigh. 6 months of not looking back, and then it arrived, the day I had circled in red on my private calendar, the one pinned discreetly inside my armoire door, notification sent. That morning, JR emailed me with just one sentence. Letters have been delivered as of 9:00 AM. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By 11:00 AM, the phone started ringing. Mark, 16 calls in one day. I watched them come in one by one, the name flashing on the screen of my cell, a name I had once loved so fiercely it nearly unmade me. A name that now only triggered stillness. Calm. I didn't answer. Not the first call, not the third, not the 12th, not the one at midnight. There was no message left, just rings and more rings, like the frantic pacing of someone who had finally realized the door was locked and they were no longer welcome inside. By the next morning, the email came. Subject line, "I'm sorry, Mom, but at least let us keep the garden." I opened it, not because I expected sincerity, but because I was curious. Curious how he would phrase it. Curious if he'd even understand what had been lost. From Mark Monroe to Blake Monroe. Subject, "I'm sorry, Mom, but at least let us keep the garden, Mom." I don't know what to say. Tanya and I got the letter from the lawyer this morning, and I don't even know where to begin. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Look, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we didn't handle the airport thing right. Maybe we underestimated how hurt you were. Tanya says it wasn't meant to feel like abandonment. She just thought you'd prefer to stay a few extra days. I know that doesn't excuse anything. But this, Mom, this is serious. You've removed us from everything. The house, the savings, the land. Even the joint account we used for the kids' school fees has been frozen. I'm not saying we didn't deserve something, but you're cutting us out completely. After everything? After all the years? At least let us keep the land behind the house. The garden. You know the kids helped plant it. You know it means something. We're not perfect, but we're your family. Can we please talk? Just one call. Just 5 minutes. Mark, I read it once, then again, and then I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the words settle. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. They thought I was too old, too soft, too desperate to be included. They thought I would bark but never bite, weep but never walk away. They mistook kindness for weakness, and now they were shocked that the woman who once sewed buttons on their coats had the backbone to write them out of the story. But I had, and I would not undo it, because they hadn't just left me at an airport. They had left me behind in every way that mattered long before that. They had chosen comfort over care, convenience over compassion, performance over presence. And now they wanted land? For the garden? That garden they never once asked me to help water, the one Tanya posted about online as her sacred space, but never mentioned my name in once? They could have it. In memory, not in deed, because it no longer belonged to them. It now sat under the care of Elder Haven, whose regional director had already visited the site and proposed turning the land into a therapeutic horticulture program for aging women with memory loss. My land, my choice, my legacy. At Willow Grove, we had a small library. That afternoon, I went there and pulled out a book of poetry. I wasn't even reading it. I just needed the weight of something honest in my hands. Helen, my new friend with the sharp tongue and soft heart, slid into the armchair beside me. "You've got that look again," she said. "What look?" I asked. "The one people wear after they've just told the world who they really are." I smiled. "Maybe I have." She grinned. "Good. That world needed to hear it." I looked down at the email on my phone one last time, reread the closing plea. Just 5 minutes. I thought about replying. One line, something clean, something true. Instead, I powered the phone off. Then I picked up my pen and wrote in my journal. Some things are inherited, others are earned, and some, like peace, are created from scratch. Let them wonder. Let them rage. Let them miss the sound of my voice when birthdays come and go, because I would be here, surrounded by people who didn't expect me to fund their comfort in exchange for their absence, surrounded by names I chose, not those who used to belong, but those who still saw me. I didn't owe anyone a conversation. I had already given them something better, a clear goodbye, and a door that no longer opened. Some days now I forget what silence used to sound like, the sharp kind, the empty kind, the kind that sat with me in the house after Jake passed, after the casserole dishes stopped coming, after my own son stopped asking how I was holding up. The silence at Willow Grove is different. Here, it hums gently. It waits for you. It does not shame you for resting or for remembering. I spend my mornings with the book club, 6 women and 1 soft-spoken man who brings crossword puzzles to share. We argue over plot twists, laugh too loud at scenes no one else would find funny, and drink tea with names none of us can pronounce. We belong to one another in the simplest way, by showing up. In the afternoons, I take gentle yoga in the courtyard. My balance is not what it used to be, but no one minds. The instructor always tells me, "You're stronger than you think." And for the first time in my life, I believe it. I've taken up painting again, something I gave up decades ago when life got busy, when Mark was young, when Jake worked late. My brush strokes are shaky, my colors too bold, but my heart swells when I step back and see something, anything, that I created just for me. One evening, while organizing some of the communal art supplies, a woman named Ruth looked at me across the table and asked softly, "Do you ever regret it?" She didn't specify what it was. She didn't have to. We all knew what she meant. I looked her in the eyes and said, "I regret not doing it sooner." She nodded. No more questions. That night, I sat alone in my room. The window was open, letting in the breeze. On the table was a framed photo of Jake, the one I brought from home, the one where he's laughing with his whole face, eyes nearly shut, hands mid-vesture. I lit a candle for him. Not for grief, but for gratitude. "I'm okay," I whispered, "more than okay." Then, after a moment, I added something I hadn't even known I needed to say. They thought I'd fall apart when they left me. They thought I'd panic, beg, chase after them. I leaned in closer, looking at his picture as if he were sitting across from me at the dinner table. But you know what, love? They're the ones who lost something that day. Not me. They lost their way back. Because that's what they did, isn't it? They mistook silence for weakness. They mistook endurance for consent. They mistook my love for a bottomless well they could draw from forever, without ever pouring anything back in. But now, I don't mistake myself for someone who owes anyone anything. Not Mark, not Tanya, not the grandkids who will one day ask why they don't know me, and who will hear whatever version of the story their parents are bold enough to tell. That's not my burden. I know my truth. I lived it, I survived it, and more than that, I rebuilt from it. Here, I'm not just the old lady who paid for the trip. I'm not a financial resource, not an inconvenience, not a figure fading quietly in a corner. I'm Blake. At Willow Grove, they say my name when I walk in the room. They save me a seat. They ask what I'm working on. They wait for my opinion in the book club before moving to the next chapter. They know when I prefer peppermint tea and when I want chamomile. They remember. They care. They see me. And I see myself. Not as a relic, not as a story that ended when Jake passed, but as a woman who lived through the worst kind of betrayal, the kind that hides behind family smiles, and came out with her name intact. Sometimes at night, I walk the courtyard alone, hand resting on my cane, watching the light spill out from the community room windows. I think about the word legacy, how everyone wants to leave something behind, but maybe the most radical legacy isn't money. It's memory. It's the right to write the ending of your own story, even if you have to rip up the old script and start fresh. I did that. I chose new names to include, new traditions to build, new family to love, not bound by blood, but by presence, by choice. And that, in the end, is what real family is. Chosen, cherished, kept. And when I blow out the candle each night, I smile, because I don't owe gratitude to anyone who made me small. I owe it to myself, for standing up, for walking away, for lighting the match and watching the lies go up in smoke. I chose myself. I chose peace. And I chose a new family, one that would never leave me at the gate. If this story made your heart ache, then made it rise again. If you've ever given everything to a family that only remembered you when they needed more, if you've ever been left behind and had to choose yourself just to keep going, then you're not alone. This is Grandma True Stories, where we don't whisper the past, we speak it with clarity, where forgotten women remember themselves, where quiet pain becomes power. So, if you believe that dignity doesn't expire with age, if you believe that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and if you believe that the truth still matters, even if it takes a lifetime to say, subscribe to Grandma True Stories today, because when a grandma finally tells her story, the world listens, and this time, she doesn't get left behind.